Something tells me that after that special issue, we aren't going to be seeing anything particularly serious in this issue. Can't see that as a bad thing after the time I've had lately. Though I do wish that the cover didn't remind me that I was living in a barren, frozen wasteland known as rural Maine at the moment. Seriously, I'm feeling some real kinship with Sonic right now. The cover is actually pretty good, with a heavy winter scene, Sonic and friends being attacked by Robotnik, who seriously should see someone about that massive double chin he's got going. We open up to the main story, way past cool. And I'm pretty sure that catchphrase nowadays is way past its expiration date. And we join the Freedom Fighters enjoying a fun summer day on the beach. Now, given this series' penchant for lying covers, I would criticize it for that, but believe it or not, the cover was actually pretty accurate as to what is going to be happening later on. And we see that almost immediately, as Sonic's hilarious hydro hijinks are brought to an abrupt end with a sudden snowstorm rolls through. Nicole is immediately able to analyze the storm and figure out through the power of plot that the storm is caused by an artificial environmental modulator manned by none other than Robotnik. We cut over to Robotnik's modulator, and I have to admit, I've been holding back on this for far too long, but from here on out, whenever Robotnik goes full-on silly like this, you all get to listen to this. That's better. Of course, Robotnik's thought process is not just to try and freeze everyone over in an Arctic wasteland, but on the off chance that they survive the sudden freeze, he'll very easily be able to find them using heat sensors and scanners, able to pinpoint their location through their body heat. Not a bad plan for what it's worth, but it's still silly and involves a freaking weather machine, so the Robotnik theme is still appropriate. Meanwhile, the Freedom Fighters are making their way through the now frozen wasteland around them, looking for some place to hide themselves. While Nicole manages to point out a nearby cave, she, like the rest of the group, is slowly starting to ice over, and so barely manages to give them directions. We cut to a single panel where Robotnik shows off a sled that I honestly think should be standard issue for anyone who wants to live in a snow-heavy environment, before immediately cutting back to the Freedom Fighters trying to shrug off the cold inside a cave, but not succeeding very well. However, a silhouetted figure appears at the edge of the panel and tells them to come with him if they want to live. Incidentally, how many times have we had this whole silhouette at the edge of the panel reveal? It's gotta be close to a dozen at this point. Anyway, a turn of the page, and we are met by Robotnik, who is more than a little cheesed off by the fact that they haven't found the Freedom Fighters yet, despite having followed the infrared sensor into the cave. As it turns out, though, Sonic and friends have escaped deeper into the cave, where a group of Arctic Freedom Fighters have set up some heated caves to keep themselves warm. Incidentally, the Arctic Freedom Fighters are another example of a group of characters who would be introduced very early on in the comic's lifespan, but would not be seen in any sort of relevant capacity for a very long time afterwards, and would also join the massive ranks of all of the characters ejected from continuity after the Sonic and Mega Man crossover. They have names, but it doesn't really come up much in their introduction here. It's more of a formality than anything else. The Arctic Freedom Fighters explain that they use discarded machine parts to build some climate control machinery that keeps sections of the cave warm and other sections cold. And while they aren't skilled fighters, they state that they are more than willing to let Sonic and friends use their Arctic zone to train, to become more used to their frigid temperatures and harsh conditions of the blizzard going on up above. They take them up on the offer and apparently do so for a full week. Just as Robotnik is ready to declare his victory secure, the Freedom Fighters come back to show the extent of everything they learned during their training. And what did they learn? How to put on winter coats and mittens, and how to roll up really big snowballs. That's about the size of it. Robotnik turns up the weather control machine, making it more difficult for the Freedom Fighters to land a solid hit against the tower with their snow catapult. And then Snively, wanting to redeem himself in Robotnik's eyes for not being right about the Freedom Fighters being dead, manages to pop out of the snow behind them and uses the freeze ray featured on the cover to freeze them all into a solid, perfectly cut piece of ice. He starts to bulldoze them back to the tower so Robotnik can roboticize them, but before they can get too far, Augustus the polar bear stops the vehicle cold while Gunterver the wolf starts chasing Snively around. Flip trips up a couple of SWAT bots while Irma and Celia attempt to get Sonic and friends loose. You know, for a group who said that they weren't very good at defending themselves, they seem to be doing a pretty damn good job of it right now. There was no description of the Freedom Fighters teaching them how to defend themselves or giving them a pep talk, or even a scene where they go through any sort of crisis knowing that their friends were in imminent danger and they weren't going to help. They literally just show up to save the day, which is especially lazy in a kid's comic. With no time to free Sonic from the ice, Sonic insists on being loaded into the catapult and being flung towards the tower. Robotnik is busy laughing maniacally upon his tower, out in the open for some reason, and Sonic crashes down atop his head, knocking him out and not splitting his head open like a grape. The ice also shatters upon impact, and Sonic destroys the top of the tower, which I suppose is what was keeping the thing going, because it doesn't take long for things to return to normal afterwards. The Arctic Freedom Fighters all pile into Robotnik's super sled vehicle, intent on heading back to their Arctic home, saying that next time they face danger, they'll have the courage to face it, thanks to the example of the Freedom Fighters. And if we had actually seen them learning that by example, this message would have been much stronger. And as they drive off, we end with Sonic suggesting that they use the leftover snow to have a snowball fight, and rightfully getting pelted for his suggestion. Yeah, that happens to anyone who tries that around here, too. Once again, we have Angelo De Caesar as our writer, and it shows in the very lighthearted and silly nature of the story. It's a fine little story on its own, but my biggest problem with it is the new characters introduced here. The Arctic Freedom Fighters make almost no impact here and take away from panel time that could have been given to more character interactions to the established characters. And while they would become much better characters later on, their inclusion here is just an attempt at expanding the cast superficially. They do try to give them something of an arc with the whole "we aren't great fighters" line, but they immediately contradict that when they do start fighting, and their attempts at showing that it was the Freedom Fighters who inspired them sort of falls flat when we weren't shown any sort of arc or growth for them over the course of the issue. Robotnik and Snively, however, actually do share a lot of entertaining dialogue during their brief appearances in the comic, and as I said, it gave me a great excuse to bust out the Adventures Robotnik theme tune. The artwork, provided here by Dave Manick, shows him at his best. His cartoonish pencils really pop, helped immensely by John DeGosting and his inking. But Manick's real strength here are the emotions and expressions of the characters, from the feral looks of the attacking Arctic Freedom Fighters to the shivering discomfort of Sonic and friends. They all look pretty fantastic. But we're not quite done yet. As we have come to expect, there is of course a backup story to look at, Fortified. And we even have the same writer for this one, though artwork is handled by Art Mawhinney. And we start out in pretty dire straits, as during a mission in the mountains, Sonic has unfortunately hurt his ankle pretty badly, leaving him unable to run, and Robotnik is hot on their heels, tracking them via magic sensors or something, I don't know. Bunny? Oh hey there, Bunny, it's nice to see you again. Bunny comes across an old log fort that the guys decide to use to try and make a stand against Robotnik. While there are a few old cannons in the fort, they're in such bad disrepair that there's no way they can use them to defend themselves. There's also an old blacksmith shop in there, which gives Sonic an idea. While Bunny locks the gates, Sonic has Rotor bring out his trusty pocket laser so that they can do something special with that useless cannon. Meanwhile, armed with a massive bus/tank/death machine, Robotnik and Snively come across the gate to the fort and easily smash their way through. But who should be waiting there for them? Bunny Rabbit wearing that thing. It's obviously a pastiche of all the bits and pieces that they were able to find in the blacksmith shop, and it honestly doesn't look terrible, maybe a little goofy, but then again, look at the comic we're reading. She introduces herself as Robo Bunny, and Robotnik immediately releases a squad of SWAT bots to get rid of her, but she just launches herself at them and bowls them over like she were playing elf bowling or something. Robotnik orders Snively to ram her, and they immediately back her into a corner. She says she can't run or jump very well in the makeshift armor, and so it looks like she's a sitting duck. However, yes, in a move that would make any aficionado of wacky races incredibly proud, Bunny demonstrates one of her least used abilities, stretchy elevator legs. In fact, I think that ability was only ever used in one episode of the TV series. It gets more use in the comic series, but just barely. Snively and Robotnik find themselves barreling down a hillside with no way of stopping themselves, and then we cut back to the Freedom Fighters who congratulate Bunny for saving them, though she's quick to point out that it was Sonic's plan that pulled it all together. And we end with Sonic saying that even when he can't run, he's still quicker than Robotnik. Give it up for him, folks. He tries his best. Hey, he was played by Jaleel White a couple of times. Okay, alright, come on. This backup story, while short, is pretty enjoyable. There's no big underlying theme here, I just suspect it was written to try and give Bunny a chance to be in the spotlight again. As I've pointed out numerous times at this point, she does have a tendency to either not appear at all in the main series, or when she does appear, it's more like a non-speaking cameo appearance. Here, she actually has a chance to show off a bit, and show that yes, she is a very capable fighter in her own right. Something that is very obvious at this point in the comic, but doesn't get shown off nearly enough. You could say that the armor was sort of superfluous, as it doesn't really factor into anything in this story other than just slowing her down. Yes, she did use it as a means to knock out the SWAT bots, but it's been shown that she's more than capable of taking them on with just her robotic limbs, and I mean, come on. At this point, it's pretty clear that they're all made out of cardboard, drywall, and glass with the way they're so easily taken down. So yeah, the armor wasn't really necessary, but it does also bring up yet another thing that I love seeing the comic do. Sonic, lacking his speed, relies on quick thinking and improvisation to help come up with a solution to save the day. And I've already praised the comic once before for that line of thinking, and it holds true here, showing that Sonic is indeed more than a one-note character, when Sega actually lets him be a character. I do appreciate the nod to the fact that it was Rotor who actually managed to whip up the armor, and in a short amount of time, showing that he also possesses a certain level of innovation as well. In terms of artwork, I don't have too many complaints. Mawini's style is just really good, and he might be my favorite artist for the pre-endgame part of the comic's run. The characters are pretty nicely detailed and look really good in his style, along with the backgrounds and environments that are very easy to recognize, but aren't so overly detailed that it becomes distracting. If I could criticize anything in terms of art, it would probably be the design of the armor for Bunny and the colors used here. In terms of the armor, yeah, it looks appropriately silly, and it's basically cobbled together from whatever they could find lying around, but there's just something about the way that it frames Bunny's face that looks really off to me. I don't know, maybe that's just me. And as to the color scheme, well, that's admittedly more on the environment where the comic takes place, as there probably wouldn't be a big variety of colors in a log fort, but it's not exactly the most interesting thing to look at. As a positive to this, it does make the relatively colorful characters and Robotnik's bus of death really stand out against everything else. And so we put a close on issue 26, and we move out to issue 27, which I'm not really looking forward to, for one very small reason at the start. This thing! I'll see you all next time.